I'm 𝐁𝐿, and you're listening to What the Heck Fintech, where you'll experience and learn that fintech is fin life. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. We have an unbelievable guest today. We're going to take things at a total new angle with Cristina Palladino. And wait till you hear what she does and how she does it. It's an area that needs to be talked about every single day, but it's not, and it should be, right? So, and Cristina will explain what that is. So Cristina's done so much. She's so focused in the fintech area, but and digital currency. So we'll hear a lot about that, but also so focused on regulation, compliance, and helping companies figure this all out. Because what is all because it's hard. This is hard stuff, right? But she takes that hardness out for all these companies in her job at Wolf & Company. So I can't wait to hear these stories. I'm going to learn so much. We're ready to rock and roll. So Cristina, how about a little player profile? Walk us through your journey, because you didn't, in elementary school you weren't doing regulation. So how did you get to this point in compliance and digital currencies? How did you grow up in this space? So I'd love to hear that story, and then we'll get into some other questions and off those stories. Sound good?
Sounds good. And thanks, Rob, for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I'll jump in and tell my story. I started in banking almost by accident. Like a lot of people, I was just looking for a stable job through, high school transition into college, what fit my schedule with my college classes. I knew banking had great benefits, so I decided let's start there and see what I could do. So started at a really low profile job as a peak time teller to be able to fit my schedule. And I just stayed in the financial system and was able to work my way up kind of as my education kept going up, right? So once I was there, I realized that it wasn't really the money part that I liked and that I loved. It was really the people part, right? Talking to the customers, getting to know their lifestyles. And when you're in the branch and you're having these conversations, you quickly find out that every financial decision is tied to an emotional event in a person's life. So, things like someone's buying their first apartment, they have a business dream that, now fast forward aligns really well in the fintech space, but, someone just trying to get out of debt and really just move on with their life. So, fast forward a decade, fintech exploded, and suddenly the same financial problems existed. And instead of being in the branches, it was in the apps, right? So you have your cell phone in your pocket and you have all these apps you're using. I really got obsessed with, how to protect people in that digital footprint in that app environment. And so some of the same basic things that I learned while being in the branches, I wanted to see how I could apply it to the digital space. And so that's how I ended up in compliance in fintech, and really just trying to find, what those human needs were and what the guardrails are to keep the innovation trustworthy and building that rapport with customers.
Now, what was your education background?
Yeah.
Was it finance? Was it something else? Was it law?
You would think. I started, my bachelor's is in criminal justice with a concentration in forensic science. So when I was in school, I wanted to be the next, Law and Order, Olivia in the crime scenes, trying to figure out what happened, how I can help people and solve all these crimes. That didn't happen. So when I, graduated with my bachelor's in science, I decided, how can I tie in my financial background to this criminal justice degree? And, when I was in school, there wasn't a lot of the forensic accounting. There wasn't a lot of this, kind of investigative work in the financial system just yet, from a digital perspective, or from just like, there weren't classes offered in forensic accounting. So I had a hard time at first trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because I didn't have the experience in criminal justice to find a good career and land a job at that point. But I quickly learned that I could move up in, accounting from the business ethic and compliance side of it. So not doing all the math, not learning all the CPA information, but learning really how to stand up a framework in compliance, in business, learning the ethics around it, learning the law around it. So I applied to a college here in Boston and got my master's in business ethics and compliance. And then a couple years in, got a concentration in forensic accounting when that program launched. So I was able to tie it all together in the end, but it definitely was not an easy, lane to that field and in that study.
Wow. And back then, right? I mean, yeah, forensic accounting's, has been around, right? But it was probably more about, audits and figuring out things. But now it's all about the data, right? And protecting that data and who messed around with that data and who's hiding stuff in the data, right? So,
Right.
I mean, so with that forensic background you have and, the compliance side, you must be having a blast now. I mean, it's all about that now. Like what's like, so since you're so into it, right? And a lot of people aren't, right? Unless they have to be, right? Or they got hacked or something, right? Or compliance is everywhere in big companies because I was at Fidelity, obviously compliance and regulatory is huge, right? So what are the things that if you can tell some stories like, and what do you see going on in other companies that you help them with? Because obviously you're in there deep and a lot of them aren't in there like you're in there.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of people are looking to help and solve problems, right? So in the digital space, there's many companies out there that want to a new app is downloaded, every day, every hour probably, and there's a new problem that's being solved with that app. So the way I look at it is how can I help those founders and those apps become trustworthy, but also not end up in headlines, right? We don't want bad actors getting into our financial system.
Mm,
And in today's world, what's scary is there's a lot of AI that's also trickling in on top of the fraud that's always been around. So the AI is turning into, deep fakes with voiceovers, or someone's picture is being altered online to make it look like they're doing something that they're really not doing. And so
mm.
that's the hardest part today. But I think really just remembering my roots and remembering where I came from to help somebody solve a problem is how I kind of look at today's financial landscape, and then how I can jump in and be like, okay, do you have, these things in place? Are you able to speak about these things? Do you understand it? And if not, that's where my, interaction starts on explaining why they need it, what's the background, how it actually will help them almost scale in the market.
And with the whole forensic, that's all after the fact, right? With the
Yeah.
forensic, forensic data, forensic everything. But I assume I could be wrong with this. So you do a lot of coaching, and I'd love to hear, how much do you coach startups and then also kind of big businesses of being proactive on those items, right? So forensics, the damage has already happened. Now you're just figuring out what really happened, which is
Right.
important. Don't get me wrong, but it's also like, how do you prevent this, and what guardrails do you put in there?
Yeah, and a big piece of my job is being out there on the circuit, educating anyone from, even a student, right? Because how are they going to enter this workforce? But founders and companies on compliance as a culture, right? Use that as your playbook and use that from day one of how am I going to instill this culture of compliance versus it's a checklist, check the box product. Because if you're thinking it as a product line, you may not think of it until, a couple months down the road where it's already too late to be like, oh, what controls do I have in place so that someone can't hack into my new system? Or, what controls do I have in place that will prevent fraud, and fraud's already happened. So it's if you're thinking about it at day one and you're thinking about it as a culture, you're already ahead of the game in understanding why it's important, understanding what guardrails to put in place before it happens. And then also from a founder fintech perspective, if you're trying to launch a partner and you have these guardrails in place, it's only going to make you look stronger, and that trust is going to be instilled from day one because the bank is going to understand, oh, they know that this is a risky environment, but they have these controls in place. They've thought about it. So that's the perspective I have from what I've done in my work with some of the cohorts we work with, some of the schools that we work with, and accelerator programs. Just compliance as a culture.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm going to give you a little personal story myself. As I was a project manager and a PMO, especially more definitely as a project manager. I used to bring audit and compliance in to a new project I was doing day one. They were part of the team. So that way, because you're right, so many people, I like a lot of the systems I was doing, I needed an audit letter before I could even go live. It was a requirement. So I might as well, why would I like scramble and do that at the end? I want it to just happen naturally. And they're also looking at not just what we're delivering, but like how are we running the project? How are we getting the right approvals? Who's part of the steering committee and the stakeholder meeting, so you have the right people to get the right feedback, so you don't step in something later, right? Why I bring and even in my classes, from a culture standpoint, I tell the students, audit is your best friend. Remember that. It's not something you avoid until the end. It's something you do up front, and you bring them along for the ride because it makes everything so much smoother. Now, that little story, do you see that a lot? Do you see that a little? It probably might depend on the different level of industry you're working with, but I'm a firm believer in that. Wait until the end, you're going to get burned bad.
Right, right. Unfortunately, it's not something we see more often. More often than not, you have great founders, great engineers, but not compliance experienced or compliance focused people from day one, right? So you kind of have to look at who you're working with. Do we need to hire somebody in compliance or consult with a firm for that compliance background? I think it's becoming more the norm now, but I don't think it's still not like, oh, I'm a founder of a company and I know compliance is important. It's really somebody telling them that compliance is important. So I'm really excited to hear that you're saying that in your classes, because I think if the more we get that message out, the more it will become normal behavior. But I think from a founder perspective, I can't speak to 100% because I am not a founder myself, but I think it's just, you're so excited to get the product launched and to get partners and to get things moving, get the process going, that what you don't know, you don't know. Right. So it's really just trying to find those right people. And the one message that I would love to get out there too is regulation is an enabler. A lot of people look at regulation as a roadblock, and more often than not, it's going to get you further. If there's guardrails in place, you're again building that trust sooner and faster. And if that trust is broken, it's really hard to get back to a place and pick up build from there and get your customers to trust you again, to get your regulation in order again. And if that trust is built from day one and you're compliant from day one, that's when you start to soar. That's when the product launch is going to go faster. Your partners are going to go faster. The process is going to go faster. Sales will go faster. So yeah, but if that's one message I can get out there, is definitely regulation is not a roadblock. If anything, it's going to help you get to the place you want to get to.
Now, I'd love to hear this take too. Your take on this question too. It's an alphabet soup of regulators, right? It's federal level, state level, might be at the municipal level, right? And especially with finance, you're dealing with people's assets and it's movement of money, and how it's happening. Do you notice people thinking and bringing in regulators, or do you actually bring regulators in? Because the regulators I've talked with is that they want to be brought in early because they don't want that new startup to run with scissors and they break them the bad news. Like, no, you can't do that. Like, no, you gotta revamp everything. It's like, do you bring them in, or do you just coach them to go reach out? Plus, who do you reach out to? There's so much overlap with the state and federal. Well, from a layman, like I thought they were, like this, but they like you got to pick, which one do you go for? And it's probably both.
It's true. It's true. I think it depends on a few things. It depends on what lane they're going in. So, for instance, in cryptocurrency, digital assets, certain types of digital assets actually require you to reach out to the examiner, the regulators first, and get an approval to work in that lane. Different levels of digital currency vary. So stablecoin, if it's certain types of stablecoin, you may not have to reach out to the regulator first. You can build your framework, build your compliance program, and then once you get going, they'll come in, audit you, and hopefully you pass flying colors because you've spoke to compliance people to coach you on. However, it just depends on what you're trying to get into, what service offering. We definitely, from an auditor and consulting perspective, we definitely do recommend that even if it does say that you don't need to reach out to the regulator, send them a little note, send them an email. Hey, we're looking to start offering, maybe it's a stablecoin product or a tokenized backed product, and this is what we plan to do with it, and here's what we're planning to do for compliance. The regulator is only going to give you a lane to work in with some recommendations on, did you think about A, B, and C? Or, maybe does that fit your profile? Is that too risky? And they're just going to give you more pointers to think about. They're not going to completely shut you down. Most regulators are open to innovation at this point. They want to see, financial institutions use technology to be able to offer more products to their customers. So I think from that perspective, I think they're open. I think it's a great idea to reach out to them. I think you just have to have a plan, right?
Yeah.
So don't just reach out to them and be like, oh, I think it's a great idea if we do this product, but you don't have a plan behind it and you don't have a compliance program behind it where you can't explain to them, like, this is how it's going to work. This is the service offering we're going to give. And, ask for their feedback, ask for what they think about it.
Yep. Yep. Now, do you see a lot of sandboxes being built? So it's a nice play area. So you can't run with scissors, and the data is all, synthetically created. So it has no PII or any problems going on there. Are you seeing that more, or maybe in bigger companies, but are you seeing that, or even helping them figure that out?
Yeah, we're starting to see it. I think the biggest step there that's missed sometimes is testing the ins and outs of the system before going live. So whether that's internally or externally, there are ways you can test data flows. There are ways you can make sure that, a banking core is talking to a fintech technology provider, an AML system, or maybe it's a middleware that you're using to on-ramp to blockchain, right? There's ways to test those. There's also ways to make sure that AI governance is in place, or, an API is working the right way. And I think oftentimes you don't think of that until that live date is already gone and passed. And thinking about it ahead of time, although right now there's really no, there's some regulation on certain aspects of it, if it's a model, if it's if it's digital currency versus a fintech versus SaaS. There's different things out there saying, you should test it, or you don't. It might not be a regulation to test it, but it's highly recommended to test it. I say just test it, right? It's not going to hurt you. It's going to only make your product better. If you find something that's not translating right or not moving over to the next system right, if you catch it now, it's only going to make the product stronger. So sometimes I think it's just thinking outside of the box of what is out there for regulation, and then maybe applying it to what you're actually trying to implement and have the service offering in. So we are waiting, more regulation for digital asset in the stablecoin area. But doesn't mean there isn't other regulations or other guidance out there that are suggestive to that lane, and you could apply to it and make sure that it's working right.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, no, when I talk to some startups too, it's interesting. Like, I remember one time a startup was saying, we're trying to collaborate with banks, but we might be our own bank. I'm like, you don't want to be a bank. You know what regulations on that? I'm like, oh, because they don't know. They don't know what they don't know, right? I mean, not that I'm an expert in regulation at all. Like, you're an expert. But I'm like, you don't want to be a bank. So, but then I said, collaborate with banks though. So that they don't know what they don't know. They're super smart. They might be young. They might, they're just getting in the field. They got a great idea, but they're not thinking the whole thing through. And that's where you come in. Now, do a lot of startups come to you, and then you get to talk to them before they even run with scissors?
Yeah, I have a great connection with Mass FinTech Hub and FinTech Sandbox, and we're lucky to be able to talk to some of these, students with these great ideas that are launching brand new products. I always look at them and I'm like, I was not thinking like that when I was in college. Like, how did they even get into this, right? But we're lucky to be able to partner with organizations, within the ecosystem, to be able to educate, be able to learn from them as well, because, again, we're only as good as what we know on the regulator side and on the examiner side. And a lot of it's coming from experience. We're learning with everybody, right? We don't know what the next step in digital assets going to be, and we're going to learn that with everybody else who's building in that ecosystem. So I think it's great that we're able to, offer some educational panels. We're able to work one-on-one. We're able to, put our contact information out there to be able to say, hey, if you have a question in the future, contact me. Maybe there's something I can help you with. Maybe there isn't, but at least I can suggest, hey, go talk to this person, or I know somebody here that might be able to help you. And I think that's a big step to understanding, okay, well, I know there's some type of guardrail compliance regulation out there that needs to happen and we need a framework in it. Maybe it's not me specifically you need to talk to, but hey, talk to the tax team, talk to, the privacy and lending team. Maybe they have some fair lending questions to ask you. And again, state by state, it varies. So they can drill down what state are you working in? Here's what you need to know, and take the next step from there. So
that's great. Please come back to part 2 with Cristina Palladino as she simplifies and explains stablecoin, the Genius Act, how fraud is happening, and the human behavior behind it all. Thank you for listening to What the Heck, Fintech. Make sure you tune into our next episode as we continue to interview fintech leaders and share real-world stories from across the fintech ecosystem, so you can fully understand that fintech is fin life.